Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer. Today I'm joined by American dissident and former InfoWars contributor, Jake Lloyd. Jake, did you enjoy MAGA night this weekend?
Yeah, Scott, I had a great time at MAGA night. The festivities, very enjoyable, great spirits. It feels great to make America great again by, sitting around and hanging out with all your Twitter conservative buddies.
Dude, it was incredible. I mean, there was just so much strength showed by the president over the weekend. I was just astounded. I just wanted to celebrate him in the White House. But we will get to that in a little bit, talk more about MAGA night and Trump's response to what is definitely the most important news story in America right now. Of course, I'm talking about the many race riots going on, or depending on who you're asking, the white liberal race riots or the white supremacist race riots. We have seen nearly a week of looting and arson with no sign of stopping anytime soon. The riots started in Minneapolis last week, but are now in nearly every American city: Portland, LA, Chicago, Nashville, DC, New York, Cleveland, even smaller cities like Columbia, South Carolina, and Birmingham, Alabama. Both the left and right want to blame white people for the violence. Conservatives say it's all Antifa's fault. Liberals say it's the work of white supremacists. Jake, who do you think is responsible for the riots?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that it's literally anybody but black people. It's everybody's fault but black people. We all probably should do some self-reflection, look inside of ourselves, and see what each of us individually did to force the hand of the black community as they, throw bricks through windows, toss Molotov cocktails at people. Or Molotov cocktails, and pull truckers out of their trucks and beat them. We should all probably consider what.
Can't believe what George Floyd made them do. I mean, they have no agency. He just send out his brain signal to them. It's like, riot now. They're about to go after John Podesta. We need to protect. we need to protect our Pizzagate. And there's a lot of people. There's a lot of conservatives who believe this. That they want to blame George Soros and our liberal network, or just some silly conspiracy theory. I mean, people love these conspiracy theories. I was talking about this with some friends a little bit earlier, that conservatives and even liberals, it's just much more exciting for them to imagine it's a conspiracy theory. It's very boring for them to see that it's blacks and even just left-wing agitators, because there's clearly a lot of white left-wing agitators. I'll get to that in a little bit. They're clearly there, but at least 50% of the people in the rioting, and depending on the city, they're 95% or 100%. It is blacks. It's local blacks. They're not outside agitators. They're not being bussed in from, Nebraska or wherever. I don't know. They keep saying that these people are being bussed in, but I'm like, this is happening in every city in America. Why are they bussing them in from places? They'll just go to their nearest large city. And even in Minnesota, they're shown that pretty much everyone who's been arrested is a Minnesota resident. But these conspiracy theories are just much more interesting. It's better to imagine that if you're on the right, you think it's George Soros or Hillary Clinton, and she's pulling the strings, and they're telling their forces to go out there and hurt Trump's re-election by rioting. Or if you're on the left, you think it's Vladimir Putin calling up his mass white nationalist network, and it's yes, go out and riot for against police racism. Go out to Minneapolis and do this. So everybody just loves these conspiracy theories. We've had a lot of liberal intellectuals who've complained over the Trump era about how this is the paranoid style in American politics and everything like that due to Trump. But it really exists on both sides, on both mainstream sides, and especially when it comes to riots. I mean, it is politically incorrect just to state the obvious that these are local blacks, predominantly, who are making up these riots. I mean, you could say that there's agitators leading them and everything like that are making them more violent. But at the end of the day, these are the majority of rioters. It's not Hillary Clinton's fault or Vladimir Putin's fault.
Right. Yeah, I think it's interesting. And like you said, I mean, everybody is basically saying blacks have no agency. They're incapable of making these decisions without, somebody else coming along and agitating them. And you have these conspiracy theories where people are George Soros is 3 degrees away from this construction company. There are bricks popping up in random cities. What is the connection here? George Soros must be ordering these bricks to be placed strategically throughout the city.
And they're finding these clips of just like one Antifa guy handing out bricks or like dollars. And they're like saying like, this is definitely proof that George Soros and Hillary Clinton are involved. Now, I do want to say this is like, we have the Antifa angle is true. The problem with the Antifa angle is that a lot of conservatives are using it to exonerate Black Lives Matter and Black people in general. I mean, it's not all blacks, obviously, but I mean, you have to, everybody with eyes can see who are at least 50% of the rioters. And Black Lives Matter, I don't have no earthly idea why conservatives want to exonerate Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter was, agitating riots during the Obama era, all on their own. They didn't have to rely on white, pasty-faced, white Antifa weaklings, as all these conservatives like to say. They didn't have to rely on them. They were already organized and agitating at that time. And I guess they realized that under Trump, it would have been bad news if they were doing this again. But now, a different era now in 2020, they don't seem like they're minding the riots. Like, no, there's not like these black activists. There's no black activists who are like really calling out Antifa, even though there will be like conservatives will find one viral video of like blacks who are just some random black who's like, why are there all these white people breaking windows? But no leader is saying that. So you can't, it is right to call out Antifa's organizing this. There clearly are extreme left-wing elements involved who are placing these pallets of bricks places, who are directing the crowds to go after police stations and not just focus on looting and to violently confront the police. There are clearly people who are there. I mean, there does seem a level of organization, but I don't think it's like George Soros or Putin or anybody like that. It is these extreme leftists who, the federal government has pretty much ignored for years and years. They just don't care about them. They're too busy, tracking down Proud Boys or something to even care about Antifa. And now they've been allowed to organize for violence unimpeded, and we're seeing the results of that. But that does not exonerate Black Lives Matter or the ordinary black, looters who showed up to steal Air Jordans. It's not. Them stealing Air Jordans is not the responsibility of Antifa. They chose to do that. And this is like their local communities are rising up. And you can't just say that like this is all Antifa's fault. I mean, people were pointing this out in the 1960s, and this is true. A lot of Southerners who were, when they had unrest going on over desegregation and everything like that, they would always claim that these were outside agitators coming in and riling up their local black community. They couldn't say that it was necessarily the local black community that was being, that was causing unrest. They always like to blame outside agitators. And for whatever reason, it's just, I mean, it is politically correct to even say that like, yeah, it's predominantly blacks. Yes, we know that Antifa is likely making this far worse and much more destructive, but that does not, exonerate the black youths who are out there.
Right. The other issue that I like, it's the same thing, same issue, but for all of these people, it's interesting. This is, I guess, kind of a side note. It's interesting how all of these people, especially like on the conservative side, who are into these conspiracy theories, they would consider themselves like free thinkers or truthers. They're kind of on the boomer side of conspiracy theory stuff, and they still fall for, like quote fake news left and right. Like there's one photograph that was going around of one person who was dressed, like Black Bloc, like Antifa, and there's a little wire for an earpiece coming from their shirt collar up to their ear, and you can just see a couple inches of it, and everybody like, they're reposting this image, and they're like, still think these protests are organic. It's like there's one dude wearing an earpiece. First of all, I knew all kinds of people who would go to protests, and like, they were just like 4 or 5 guys, and they were there to like, it was kind of goofy, like right wing, like we're going to protect people stuff, but they'd wear earpieces. And plus, to top it off, not only does that like not, somehow this one image discredits the entire narrative that, people are destroying stuff because they just can't control themselves. The image itself is from Germany in like 2015. It's not even from.
Well, yeah, there's been so many images. Like every conservative is like sharing this like clip. I think it's from Baltimore in 2015 or 20. Yeah, that was 2015 during the riots. And there's like a guy who always went to protest as a black guy. He's like, "Hey, y'all, can I give you a hug, a police officer?" And like the cop, of course, gives him a hug. And they're like, we need more of this. This is so heartwarming. There's this trend
Faith
of
in humanity restored.
Yeah, there's this trend of conservatives just seeing blacks not commit crimes at these riot scenes, and they're like, we need more of this. This is awesome. Like, people acting awesome. It's like, yes, we salute you for not committing a crime, like for doing the basic minimum, the bare minimum of what you're supposed to do as a citizen is like now this viral clip for conservatives. It's upworthy for conservatives just to see that, like, who the people in that community who are seeing these riots to be like, put back their Air Jordans. They're taking like 3 pairs of shoes and then they like put back 2 of them. And they're like, humanity restored. They only took what they needed. It's like, we need more of this. And they always like find like some, and they're even like gravitating towards people who are giving very left-wing messages. Like, I saw a ton of conservative pundits tweeting out Killer Mike's speech, which was like, it was like saying, please don't riot. But at the same time, it was like a full-on radical left-wing agenda about like police killing blacks and everything like that. It's like accepting the whole Black Lives Matter narrative, without any question. And this is like very different from what happened in 2015 and 2016, during those riots. Like, Republicans were like, we need law and order. Like, Richard Nixon had the right idea. They would all condemn Black Lives Matter and say that like police racism is not a real thing. Right. Now they're all saying that like systemic racism and police racism is a real thing. And there's been a lot of prominent conservatives to say that, like Mitt Romney, Nikki Haley, Carly Fiorina, Heritage President Cole James, and even Mike Pence have all said this stuff, and even like talked about white privilege. I think Carly Fiorina had the worst when she bemoaned her white privilege and said how it hurts non-whites in our country, and this is like our country's greatest sin. Meanwhile, no Republican is issuing a strong condemnation of the riots, certainly nowhere near as strong as their attacks on racism. And this is just a major change, and I don't know necessarily how it happened, because Trump won in 2016 on a message of pushing back against Black Lives Matter and stuff. There were a lot of conservatives who are in favor of criminal justice reform, but now like the entire party is in favor of it.
Right.
And at that time, they were championing law and order. Now they're not. What do you think causes change?
I really don't. It's really hard to put a finger exactly on what it could be. I mean, you've seen the entire party shift more and more towards supporting a lot of things that they used to not support. I mean, just 15 years ago, they supported, like half the states supported like full bans on homosexual marriage, that type of stuff. And now
George W. Bush won election in 2004 by promising a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage, and 11 years later, it's legal throughout the country.
Exactly. And it's like, not only is it like legal, but you're not allowed to have a different opinion about it.
Yeah, you're not even allowed to operate a business if you disagree with it.
And yeah, it's like the mark of the beast. Like, to buy or sell now, you have to have like a rainbow flag printed on your forehead. And so when Trump was elected, there were still like, Trump was never like, I'm going to ban gay marriage. He was never that guy. But at the time of the election, there were still a lot of conservatives, because I mean, the decision had just gone through, relatively shortly before. And so there was still a lot of conservatives who would voice opposition to it. And now the line has completely changed from, we don't support this to, I disagree, but I 100% your, God-given right to marry a man and, have sex with him and flaunt it in the streets and stuff. So just to bring it back around, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I'm not sure if it's because people are, rather than trying to set the stage, I think politicians are increasingly just following the whims of the people, and people have just continued to be brainwashed further and further by, Hollywood, the media, what have you. And so maybe that's why it's happening. I mean, you have John Cardillo. Like, I saw
I think it might be Cardillo. Well, let's respect his Cuban roots.
Is it? Okay, sorry.
I think it's Cardillo.
I had a
well, that's America. He's Cardillo.
Speak English. This is America. I had a drill. I never know. I had a drill sergeant whose name was something like that. It was just, not to dox me. He was like, it's Cardillo. He's like, I'm not Mexican, it's Cardillo or something like that. So anyway, I saw your
our assimilated Hispanics.
I saw your tweets. Yeah, I was like, based. I saw your tweet to him about Richard Nixon or whatever, and he's like, different times or something like that. I'm like, dude, why are you trying so hard to I don't know, just pander to? It's like nobody cares about Trump actually doing anything. They just want to perpetuate. They just want to get him another term in office so that we can put a tally on the board to say, hey, we won another term, and so that we can use that as leverage to try and win another one and do nothing. It's nobody cares what the president or the Congress is doing. They just want to make sure that it's their guys doing it. So
yeah, it's like worrying about the team. It's like their favorite football team. It's like, well, we'll win the big game, but it's like, well, you're not doing anything after winning the big game. It's like we need Trump to win an election to continue to let rioters take over these cities. It's like there's no like, what kind of pitch is that? It's like we need my pitch is we're gonna let the rioters take over because they happen to be run by Democrats, even though like my people go there to shop and work. But yeah, I'm gonna just let them be taken over by a law, like total chaos. Like nobody in like the late 60s would have said this. Like not even Barack Obama would have been like, if it was happening in a rural town, be like, oh yeah, well, my voters aren't there, I'm just gonna let it happen. There's no real political strategy to it at all. It's just it's just grasping for reasons to defend Trump's impotent action, which we'll get to later in the show. And Cardillo is not even like one of these people who really supports criminal justice reform. I remember in 2014 or 2015 and 2016, him like really saying like really radical stuff about Black Lives Matter and calling them terrorists and like being full on opposed to any like tolerance for criminals and like any light on crime policies. He's like defending stop and frisk and mandatory minimums and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But
not even that long ago.
He's not, I don't know if he necessarily, has changed on that matter. I mean, he's just turned into a more Trump shell and he's looking for reasons to defend Trump in a situation where it's very hard to defend him. And so like the causes of that Republicans adopting these Black Lives Matter, I think one of the reasons is unfortunately Trump going all in on criminal justice reform after he got rid of Sessions. In 2018, when he signed the First Step Act, several celebrities like praised him, like the Kardashian family, like turned him into a hero. Journalists praised him. Van Jones was like talking about how great Trump is for signing, the First Step Act.
Mm-hmm.
He got all of this praise for doing this. And Trump is a very vain person who is susceptible to flattery, as we've seen by the numerous never Trumpers who have infiltrated his administration just by being like, oh, you're so smart, you're so handsome, you're so great, you're the greatest president ever. And then he like gives them a position where they can advocate for like more immigration. So there's all these people like that. So he's susceptible to flattery. And now with Trump, who was elevated as the guy standing up for law and order, standing opposed to criminal justice reform and light on crime policies. Now that he's adopted that, the rest of the party has followed suit. Like there's not really, a central figure, a rallying figure who's going against these light on crime policies, against the First Step Act, against these criminal justice reform. I mean, you really just have like Tucker Carlson, a few senators like John Kennedy from Louisiana, Tom Cotton, a few other people in the House. You just have a few of these people, but they're outliers. They're not the mainstream. They're not the mainstream of the party, and the party is just following this line. I think conservative pundits have gotten a lot worse on this because I saw like people who work at the Washington Examiner, like Siraj Hashimi, like he has this like really cringe meme where it's like, oh, you're going in my notebook for a bad tweet, and like all these fellow cringe people love it. And people who were saying like Charlie Kirk and Tommy Lauren, which very surprisingly, like Charlie Kirk and Matt Walsh have probably been some of the best conservatives in response to the riots. Redemption arc, Groyper War got us to this moment. But they're like saying that like white privilege doesn't exist. And this would have been a standard conservative talking point in 2015. And now like the respectable crowd at like National Review and Washington Examiner will mock you and say that this is rhetoric we can't tolerate in the conservative movement. So it is like a development, and really we've seen I don't even think there was real police brutality and an epidemic of it in like 2014 and 2015 at the peak of Black Lives Matter. And now we've seen less of it. Like there are studies showing that like black police involved fatalities with blacks has like significantly declined. Like whites are even more the majority of the police involved killings. And so it's like seriously declined. There's not like stop and frisk is like no longer cities are reducing that. They're not having stop and frisk anymore. We're already seeing like mandatory minimums being challenged. So there's not like this. There's already progress in the opposite direction. And we're seeing a slight uptick in crime due to this. They're still using these talking points from 2014 for like Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I think a part of it is that the general culture has become more radical due to Trump in a left-wing direction. That Trump has polarized them so extremely that they'll now defend riots because, this is a huge change from the Obama era. Back then, like all the journalists, celebrities, and politicians will say, we have no tolerance for riots. Your cause may be good, but blah, blah, blah. No, but none of them are condemning the riots. All of them are siding with the riots. Like celebrities, politicians, and journalists are raising bail money for these rioters. Like 13 of Biden's campaign staffers are raising bail money. This would have been like a political suicide even in 2016, but now they just like openly do that and think that this is the way to go. And there's people like Chrissy Teigen, when people are like, these are criminals, and they're like, actually, I'm raising my bail money. I'm giving to them. And there's also big Twitter accounts like Yashar Ali, who with his fake Avi that doesn't look anything like him, and he has lots of sway over conservative journalists, and he's going full in on supporting the rioters. So a lot of conservatives are following his lead. And also, you also see at the same time that journalists will lie openly for these rioters and say that these are totally peaceful protests while there's like a building in the background burning. So, I mean, you really have to conclude that Black Lives Matter won, right?
Police are starting. I mean, I've seen, I don't even know how many videos, several videos of, and of course, this doesn't reflect the entirety of the police force in America, but it's notable that there have been multiple sheriff's departments and police departments throughout the country which have said, look, we're out here, we just want you guys to know we support you. We're out here to make sure that you're safe and that all of this goes okay, but we support you. We think what happened in Minneapolis was terrible. We want justice reform too. We want that. We want this or we want that. And, we love you guys. We just want to know, we just want you to know that we're out here to support you, blah, blah, blah. The police in Portland took a knee. They took a knee. They're in riot gear and they take a knee.
They took
all
knees
these
everywhere. They took knees in like DC and all of these places. And I think somewhere maybe in Texas or some are, I forget where. There was like another place where the whole police force took a knee, and they're doing it at the request of the rioters. Like they're getting ordered to take a knee, and they just take one. It's just so.
And then they
pathetic.
And then the protesters, the rioters will come through the police ranks and pat them on the back and shake their hand and stuff. It's like, dude, this is humiliating. These people want to kill you. The only reason they're not killing you right now is because you're cucking to them. It's like the same energy as, these white liberals on their knees licking the boots of black Hebrew Israelites on the streets of New York. It's just disgusting. It's humiliating.
Yeah, and there was some clip of white evangelicals bowing before a black church group and apologizing for racism and begging for forgiveness. And once again, this was shared by a lot of conservatives we need more of this, because the black group also said okay, we accept it. And it's this faith and humanity restored.
Well, the white people were like, Lord, we pray for forgiveness for the ways we've wronged the black community for years of systemic racism, blah, blah, blah. And then the blacks get down and they kneel and they're like, Lord, and we as a black community ask forgiveness too. And you're like, okay. And they're like, for, holding anger against white people for being so racist. It's like, dude, that's not even a real apology. It's there's, so yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, one point about the riots is that it's reinforcing the prevailing power structure run by liberal elites. And there's been some people on the right who have decided to be contrarians and decided to see that the riots are actually threatening capitalism or threatening the global order, and that we're cucks for standing on the side of the police by like saying that riots are bad, and like actually we're target defender or target simps or something like that. There's been some cringe takes. I think most of it has disappeared as like this is carried on. They've seen people violently assaulted. They're seeing that like the state is just stepping aside, and that all the elites are siding with the rioters. Like if you're like thinking this is a threat to the capitalist order, you're standing on the side of the Democratic Party, Chrissy Teigen, Steve Carell, Joe Biden. You're standing on. This is not a threat to public order. This is power expressing itself, and this is power going up against the one institution that actually is stepping outside of the liberal order in America. I mean, police unions are arguably probably the most based institution there is.
Yeah.
No, they defend a lot of stuff. Like they'll defend like asshole cops and some of this stuff. But at the end of the day, they're still largely a force to get. If they didn't exist, like our police forces would look like they do in the UK. It'd be these fat herbs who go around writing tickets for Facebook posts. And then they get, anytime they like confront somebody, like a youth, like an urban youth, they get their ass beat. This like, look at British police and you're almost like, well, okay, this is like, I would just like hate my country if I was patrolled by like the like schlub in like a British police uniform who always gets like destroyed by like anytime they try to arrest like an African immigrant. Like they'll have to get 5 cops and they all get their ass kicked by this one guy. I would be, and then they pretty much focus on being hall monitors. And without police unions, like they would be entirely cucked.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they're doing is like the whole powers see the police as the last institution where racism exists. So they're fine with the rioters going after them, and they feel comfortable in their suburban houses or their nice, wealthy enclaves in the city, that they don't have to worry about the rioters. There's been a lot of people who have, there was like a former ESPN reporter, his last name's Palmer. I can't remember the first name. I think it's like Brent or something. And he was like tweeting like, burn it all down. But then it came to his like wealthy neighborhood, I think in LA or New York City. And he's like, what are you idiots doing? Don't burn down my area. Go back to where you belong. This is terrible. We all stand with Black Lives Matter. And there's a couple different cases where people were upset. They're like, no, why are you attacking Chinatown? These are minorities too. And they have like previous tweets like burn it all down. Like I stand with the revolution.
Right.
They don't feel like they're going to feel the pain from this. And when they do express feeling the pain, then they become cringe, not only to the right, but to the left. The left is like, yeah, you deserve it too. And they're just letting this monster get out of hand. So I mean, like there will always be contrarians on right-wing Twitter who want to make an opposite point to what's the obvious take on any subject matter. But like thinking that this is, yeah, if you're thinking that this is like some grand insurrection against the liberal order, you're delusional and you're just trying to get left wing audience for your podcast or whatever.
Yeah, I haven't scrolled the timeline very much today, but I'm fully expecting several tweet threads on how the next wave of minority Trump voters is going to be the Latin Kings, because they're just primed for it. They understand law and order. They're defending their neighborhood. They're practicing their right to bear arms. They believe in the Constitution. They're practicing localism, and for that they're primed to be brought over to the Trump right.
I actually support more believing like Latin Kings and MS-13 will be Trump supporters. I mean, it is like joking that like they're like taking rioters out, but it's really they're motivated by racism and they're like, yeah, we don't want black looters in our community. I mean, that is what it is. They probably are more open to a Trump message. Not necessarily we should do outreach to the Latin Kings and MS-13, but it is show that like the only areas in the only urban communities that are like showing, caring or trying to stop this are ones where Hispanic gangs are, prime influence. I mean,
Right.
one of the reasons that they have to defend is like a lot of these businesses pay protection money to them.
Right.
And yeah, they're like, what are we paying you for if you're not protecting us? So, and protection money, of course, is a racket, and we definitely don't support that. And it really does hurt the community. I mean, it keeps it in, like you shouldn't be paying thugs for protection money when they're not really offering you protection. But I think it is a better, in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it is smarter for Trump and the Republican Party to try to appeal to Hispanics, not with the Jeb Bush agenda of amnesty and tax cuts and globalism and blah blah blah. It really is just saying like, well, we're going to prevent immigrants from taking your job. We're going to prevent like lawless elements from destroying your community. We're going to support law and order. We're going to support an America First agenda, and we're going to support strong immigration policies, strong trade policies that protect your working class jobs. And I think that would not only appeal to white working class, it would appeal to a lot of Hispanics as well. Not the majority of them, but I think it would appeal to. There will come a time where Republicans are winning roughly 40% of the Hispanic vote. It won't be because they're speaking Spanish or offering them amnesty or just being like huge libs. It'll just be with like a national populist agenda.
Right. Yeah, or they can just become overtly racist, and they'll probably like that. There's like all these videos of like Hispanics like saying, "Keep these N-words out of here. We're going to kill N-words."
Well,
like,
hopefully they don't go that far.
Yeah,
it's like
hopefully not.
The real Fed posters are Hispanics.
Yeah,
like actually, we need to keep Hispanics out to diminish racism in America. Like that's the real theme. But the one like. Another part I've been finding interesting about the riots is that a lot of these are directly targeting historic monuments that are associated with old white America. In Richmond, Virginia, they burnt down the Daughters of Confederate Veterans headquarters, and they destroyed an irreplaceable flag, Stonewall Jackson's battle flag. They destroyed that. They're going after monuments in a lot of these southern cities. I think they were pulling down stuff in Birmingham and trying to pull down stuff in Richmond. In Nashville, they pulled down a statue of Edward Carmack, who was like a senator who was assassinated. He wasn't even really particularly associated with racism or, quote unquote racism or white supremacy or whatever. He was just like a guy who wrote like negatively about like Ida B. Wells. And they decided that is a grave offense and deserves to him to be toppled. And even in, I think it was in DC, or no, Philadelphia, where they were vandalizing George Washington statues and spraying Black Lives Matter on them. And even in DC, they vandalized the World War II monuments. So there really are. It is like an entire assault on the historic American nation. Literally, I mean, they are trying to take down our monuments and destroy our heritage in this insurrection. And it's like a totally Bolshevik mindset that's taking over them, and no one's really stopping them. Like no one's going to like protect these statues or monuments. And a lot of them will never be put up again. As it clearly in the Daughters of the Confederate Veterans headquarters, a lot of those artifacts that they preserved, they can't replace them. And and there's people who are celebrating. They're like, yeah, good. We're glad we're destroying history. And a lot of the graffiti that's been spray painted on is like down with white America, fuck white America or whatever. And people still don't want to acknowledge the racial angle here, that like they're coming after you not because of police brutality. They're coming after you because they hate you for being white, and they delusionally think that they live under a white supremacist society.
Right. And I mean, they burnt down, I don't know if they burnt it all the way down, but it was on fire, St. John's Episcopal Church in DC, which is extremely significant historical site. And that paired with, it really is like a Bolshevik mindset, like you said, because you have on Twitter all kinds of people coming out and saying like good. There are people who are saying like the country is burning, and people will reply being like, no, it's being reborn. And you have all of this happening as like it's being replaced. You know how deeply it'll take root is yet to be seen. But you have that being paired with this revisionism that's just completely just totally lies. It's things taken from certain other historical events, and just leave it at that. But they're like saying these tweets have like hundreds of thousands of likes, and it's people saying stuff like white people used to use our hair to
Yeah,
make
they
their
turned
clothes.
us into shoes.
They
It was
turned us
like
into
white people were wizards, like or like
Yeah.
they're like we used our magic wands to turn them into shoes. It was like what? I don't
Yeah.
think this happened. It's
Somebody-
like the most outrageous lies and claims. No, and they'll believe anything. They'll like, yeah, they're
was one
sharing
that
all.
said-
There was like one. They were a viral clip went around of like this is real, and it's like an inward hunting license. It's like, yeah, this has never existed ever in America, and like this is not. And they all believe this. It got like 10,000 likes and everything.
And people were all like, "My chest hurts. I can't believe this is our real history. Why were we never taught this in school?" Like because it's not real.
No, they'll believe in any lies, and it's there. I mean, this comes from the mainstream, and the 1619 Project. It's not sharing the most ridiculous claims, but it does share lies. It says that like the revolution was fought to preserve slavery. No, it wasn't. It's claiming that blacks built this country. I mean, no, not really. I mean, they were here, but they were not the ones at the Constitutional Convention. They were not the ones leading the revolution. They were not even the ones who were leading the Civil War. They were
even the
they were not
infrastructure
the central focus of American history. I mean, it was
the infrastructure wasn't even built by them.
Yeah, no, it was European Americans primarily from the British Isles who are the central focus of American history. They're the ones who built it. But in American history, and now in like primary school education, all you're going to hear about is the 1619 perspective, where it's blacks are the central focus. They did everything good. Whites actually did everything bad, and we have to honor them and say that their memory. And then they'll probably share all these like stories about whites turning blacks into shoes or lamps or whatever that they're trying to claim. And and people just tolerate this. People never call this out. Like they always worry, all these journalists always worry about fake news and these lies and misinformation that are being put around. And even with like, they're starting to fact check Trump's tweets, but none of these will ever be fact checked. It's like, they're of course not fact checking like the Minnesota governor blaming white nationalists for the riots. And people are just like, this is just going down a memory hole. Like none of these Minnesota officials who blamed white nationalists, who were doing that just to get like the goofy white liberals in their state on their side so they could like crack down. I think it was just done so they could authorize like the National Guard. And they knew they couldn't authorize the National Guard if they're like, yeah, this is local blacks and leftists. They're like, no, you can't use the National Guard. But then them saying that this is white nationalists, then they're like, oh, please use as much harsh military force as possible. So by portraying Antifa as white supremacists, they could justify using the National Guard, which I think is the very cynical explanation. I don't think the governor clearly knew that these were not right-wing extremists or anything like that. He just said this in order to get political support for using stronger force against the rioters, which is a sad fact that the only way you can use rioters is by declaring them racists. Right. If they're leftists, you can't do anything about it. And going back, just want to go back briefly to the final point about the culture that we're seeing. There's been a cultural change. I was on Normie Book over the weekend to check out and see what the normies are saying about the riots. And pretty much everybody my age was talking about Black Lives Matter, about how horrific police racism is, how I saw very few defenses of police. I was seeing tons of arguments in favor of white privilege checking and things like that. And this is something very different. I would have never seen some of these people. A lot of these people were, fraternities and sororities at my college, or normie friends from high school that I would have thought were conservative. And they were people who were fully repeating Ta-Nehisi Coates' talking points that they would have been condemning like 5 years ago. They're like, white privilege doesn't exist because like my mom was poor and blah, blah, blah. Like I didn't have any privilege. And then they'll stick up for cops. Like I saw a lot more pro-police posting during the 2015 riots. But now it's like, the normies our age, even though you're allegedly a Zoomer, I'm a millennial, are much more left wing or believe a lot more of this stuff than people did like 5 or 6 years ago, and it's just infiltrated the entire normie culture. Which maybe that's like an effect of movies and like the music they listen to. I mean, every celebrity now wants to be more political in the age of Trump, and they always say these messages. Or it's, I think it is like prevalence that they've just been able to better propagandize to affluent white female liberals, and awfuls like dictate social norms now, because like men will be less hesitant to express their own genuine viewpoints if it's like, well, my girlfriend will get mad at me and I don't want to offend her, and so they'll like just like, okay, honey, I'll say Black Lives Matter too, and so they do dictate a lot of, and white women in general are just more likely to, women in general are more susceptible to peer pressure. They want to fit in more. There's more desire. They'll accept, the popular discourse, and they want to appear to be morally good. And society tells them to be morally good. You're on the side of rioters. You're on the side of these activists. You are against racism. Racism is the worst thing possible. And they just fully go along with it.
Yeah. I was on Facebook a couple days ago, and I saw something very weird. I don't know if this was an attempt for, guys to like cope with this so that they felt more comfortable, not talking bad about the riots and stuff. But a lot of people saying stuff like, I don't necessarily agree with what these riots are doing, but you have to remember, like, what the Boston Tea Party was like, they were trashing, they trashed somebody else's property too. And so maybe this is kind of
Sam
the same
Adams
thing.
is trying to find his Air Jordans or his Air Claws or whatever. What type of shoe brand? He's like, I got it. They're running off like the Sons of Liberty are just trying to get like their shoes. It's like, I was like trying to get as much tea as possible. I mean, they were throwing out the tea. Like, first off, that was like clearly a political protest. Second off, like that was a political protest against a foreign power that was not giving them representation. This is literally just children who are already coddled by the system and given tons and tons of benefits by, the powers that be, just having another temper tantrum that they're not getting enough of their demands met. The Boston Tea Party was us revolting against a foreign power. And they were also not stealing the tea. They were dumping it in the ocean.
Right.
It was clearly a political protest. And it's like, they're trying to compare this. It's like, they're sullying the names of, and they think these founders are white supremacists. So I don't know why they're trying to use the founding fathers as an example for, the insurrectionary behavior that we're seeing now.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they I really think that they just, everything gets the stamp of approval so quickly, as long as it's, on the right side of history, that people don't actually have to think about stuff, or they're just willing to lie. Because I saw somebody post, and this was a liberal. They posted something like, white people be saying that destroying property won't fix anything. Well, didn't y'all burn Nike stuff? And, when Colin Kaepernick, it's like, yes, so I burned a Nike shirt, and that's exactly the same as you breaking into the Nike store, stealing everything inside, and then setting it on fire. That's the same thing. Well,
you don't know, but those shoes were actually people that have been transformed by Yakub and his other evil white magicians. So you actually checkmate, Jake Lloyd. So you're like, white people were worse because they were burning people.
That's so funny you say that. I was red pilling some of my normie friends on they're like base normie, like that type of thing, but I was red pilling them on Yakub over the weekend.
But this is the stuff they actually believe in. And another point you're going about the history is we're once again bringing back the cringe memes about like the original Antifa and its World War II soldiers from America. And then like I was like posting, it's like, well, let's see what their opinions about segregation were. And it's like 90% of troops like were wanting the army to stay segregated. They all had these opinions that were the complete opposite of Antifa. They were definitely not fighting for, anti-racism and stuff. They just thought the Nazis were a threat to to their individual countries. I mean, England was fighting for their survival, or what they believed was their survival. Same with the Poles, same with the Russians, and everything like that, and same with the Americans. And it's also like, how are World War II soldiers in the Pacific fighting against fascism and race and white supremacy when they're fighting a non-white enemy who was explicit, and the Japanese were explicitly trying to kick out whites from Asia, and that's how they propagandized to other Asians. They're like, yeah, we're kicking out the white menace. And that's why they're treated our American and British prisoners of war so cruelly. It's because they thought that the white man was the greatest evil. And there's all these images of these World War II soldiers flying Confederate flags and everything like that. And they're definitely not Antifa. They will always say Dwight D. Eisenhower was Antifa. Winston Churchill was Antifa, even though Winston Churchill wanted the Conservative Party in the 1950s to run on the slogan, "Keep England white." Even though conservatives might say ha, this proves Antifa are the real racists. But of course they wouldn't sully Winston Churchill's reputation like that. But they use history in these cringe ways that does not understand the people at the time, that doesn't understand the social norms at the time, doesn't understand any of these things. It's just like using them for lame, goofy meme talking points that doesn't acknowledge the past. America, these same people will say America was white supremacist. They'll even say our soldiers fought fascism to come back and enforce it through segregation. But at the same time, they're complaining about Antifa again. We need the D-Day soldiers again to say that Antifa is good and great, and our soldiers then were just like them. So they don't. There's a very shallow understanding of history. They'll exploit it for any means, and due to their immense cultural power, the normies will believe whatever they say.
Right. And you even, to keep going with the World War II thing, there's been a shift in what the accepted narrative is about World War II, even in the past, however many years, maybe it's the past 20, probably max. I'm not totally sure. Obviously, I wasn't around prior to that. But, for the longest time, what I remember reading in history books in elementary school and everything was that we were fighting against Germany for XYZ reasons. And then when the war was over, we realized what kind of atrocity, it was worse than we thought. The Holocaust was happening. And we found out near the end of the war and all of this stuff. And now these people, like the people who are saying, your grandpa fighting in Germany who landed on Normandy was Antifa. It's like they believe that these guys were going over there because they were going to save the Jews, because everybody knew how bad. So we're seeing the revision of history shift in real time, I think.
Well, it's the same with the Civil War. The Civil War was fought to preserve the Union, and most of these Union soldiers would have revolted and mutinied if they were told that you're fighting in slavery. They're like, we are definitely not fighting for that. They were fighting to preserve America as they saw it, as an undivided Union. They were fighting. That was the reason why these Northern soldiers were fighting, and they were not. And there was there was draft riots over the fact that. Over the perception that they were fighting for Black rights, and they were fighting and dying and being maimed for people that they didn't want in their states. And there were several northern states that were trying to prevent freed Blacks from coming into their domain. But now it's being retconned as actually it was a war to end slavery, and all these Union soldiers were going over there and fighting for that. When there was a lot of them who, there were a number of abolitionists, but they were a minority. The majority were not. They were fighting to preserve the Union. That was a stated war aims. Lincoln only thought about imposing a constitutional amendment to end slavery when the war was about to end. But it's being retconned. It's now they even try to recruit Union soldiers as Antifa. And I was like, I don't think these Irish immigrants who were involved in the 1863 draft riots were Antifa. I don't think any of these guys who are supporting laws to bar freed Blacks from coming into their states were Antifa. But they really like that because they're they're fighting against white racist Southerners. It's they both had a lot of the same racial views, both North and South. And it was really more of a fight to preserve the Union from the Northern perspective. Yeah,
and nativism was an extremely, extremely commonplace worldview or political.
Yeah, the Republican Party was a lot of its members came from the nativists. And a lot of the nativist elements that was popular in the 1850s went into the Republican Party. But that's also taken because they also will like say, well, it's like a lot of immigrants. It was immigrant power that was taken down the South. It was like these were white they were white immigrants from primarily from Ireland and Germany, and a few Scandinavians as well. This was not, Somalians and Guatemalans and and Indians who are going over there to fight. But that's now the perception is that all these immigrants that you're hating on now, they actually fought to preserve our freedom during the Civil War.
Thank you, immigrants.
Yeah, thank you. They do so much, and we don't acknowledge them enough in our history books.
Not nearly.
Yeah, but going back to a lot of the riots that were going on is like we have to talk a little bit about the George Floyd, who is at the center of the riots, or as the ostensible purpose for all the rioting. Floyd has become a blameless martyr since his death last week. His armed robbery conviction, where he pointed a gun at a woman's stomach while robbing her place, has been forgotten. Can't bring up his 5 years in jail. Police were called on him last week after he passed a forged check to an Arab store owner. The owner told police he was acting drunk and belligerent on his premises when he was confronted about the forged check. He would also not return the merchandise he purchased with the forged check. He later died in police custody. Of course, what the video shows, it looks excessive force. It looks like it was a crime. We, of course, want the judicial system to investigate this. But Floyd is, you can say that, like, okay, there's something that was wrong. There's like possible manslaughter or something like that. This officer clearly was in the wrong. But at the same time, they're now trying to make Floyd like a hero or a martyr for the cause. And they're ignoring his like lengthy criminal record. I don't necessarily think somebody is good when they point a gun at a woman's stomach to rob her. I don't really think that is. But now I really do think that we may one day have a George Floyd Remembrance Day. Am I crazy for thinking that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. And that's, we'll probably have, George Floyd statues erected. And there was some thread from some lady. She's like, I'm an Egyptologist, so I know how to do this. I'm like, I don't know how this, why that's a qualification. But she's like, this is how you tear down an obelisk. And she goes through this whole thing. So I would imagine that we're going to tear down all of our nations. We're probably going to tear down the Washington Monument. And we're going to have a monument to Big Floyd right there in the middle of Washington.
And a few people joked, I think Second City Bureaucrat joked that his statue will be him pointing a gun at the woman's stomach. I mean, you can think that this is a crime without turning him into this great martyr. And like, even Trump is doing this. Like, we have to honor his memory. You have to honor, he's like, this is not how you honor his memory. He's like, committing criminal acts for, a convicted criminal. I don't know. It's not necessarily like he was like a blameless martyr. I mean, you could say that like about Martin Luther King, who always preached nonviolence, and there was nationwide race rioting over him. He was always trying to stop that and was opposed to that. That you could say that's no way to honor his memory. But I mean, it's like Floyd is no Martin Luther King. And I'm not saying that as somebody who thinks that Martin Luther King is this great national hero. I'm just pointing it out as a fact that it's like the level, the standard for becoming a hero for multicultural America is significantly plummeting if it becomes George Floyd. And I think there will be a kind of Remembrance Day because they do need to propagandize to the nation that police racism is a terrible atrocity and that we all need to atone for it. And George Floyd will become the symbol for that.
I won't be surprised if Trump does that. If Trump says, we're going to have a national day of prayer or remembrance or something.
A few conservatives are pushing back on this, which is very different from the cause of the 92 LA riots. I mean, Rodney King, like there were tons of people who were pointing out that this was a piece of shit. Like they were saying that like this guy's got a lengthy criminal record. He was high on PCP. He was attacking the officers. Of course, the officers may have used excessive force, but Rodney King in his high-speed chase put many lives at risk, and he then attacked officers. And he later went on to commit several crimes after his whole ordeal. He was not necessarily this moral exemplar that some people were saying. I mean, he of course had the benefit of being alive, and he was trying to tamp down on the riots with his platform that he could use. But there were plenty of conservatives who are pushing back at this narrative that we need to honor like Rodney King. They're like, yeah, we're not honoring this person, even if we think that it's excessive force. Like this guy is, this is not somebody we want to, celebrate. This is not a model we want for our citizens.
Right.
Tons of conservatives like that, and that's been the prevailing, meme among conservatives. Like conservatives are never, when they hear Rodney King, they do not think like, oh, honor his memory. Oh, honor Rodney King. They think of like him as like a dirtbag who, may have experienced a little bit too much police brutality, but he ultimately brought it on himself. I'm not saying that necessarily Floyd brought it on himself. I think we do need to allow this whole investigation to go out. Like, I don't want to, I mean, it's probably that the officer may have used excessive force, that he may be guilty of manslaughter. I'm going to let the courts decide that. I'm going to let our judicial system assign that. I don't want like politicians to just to say that somebody's murder because they're appeasing the mobs. Like America is not run by mob rule. We have a pretty decent legal system. I mean, it's gotten worse over time, but it's still much better than in Europe and other places. And I think it should be untainted by the mob's opinion. And so maybe he is guilty. Maybe this officer is guilty. Maybe he did do something wrong. I'm not ruling that out, but I do think it is a little obnoxious to turn George Floyd into, a great hero of American history.
Yeah. Well, you had the head coroner or whoever it was, maybe the prosecutor was out there, and he was saying, at this time, we have evidence to suggest that it was not, like, he did not die of asphyxiation. And so many people were replying with stuff like, read the room. Like, do you know what's happening? Like, what do you mean read the room? Like, read the room and see how people feel about that to decide.
Well, and they charged this guy with murder. They charged the officer, Derek Chauvin. I guess it's Chauvin, how you pronounce it. They charged him with murder due to the riots. I mean, it's kind of a smart decision. I think it's like they have to try anything. I mean, but the original prosecutor is like, other evidence show that that he's not guilty of murder. I mean, because as the initial autopsy report shows, he didn't die of strangulation. It wasn't necessarily the knee to the neck. That might have contributed to his death. Maybe he had a heart attack and was caused by, the stress he was feeling, or the stress and the pressure that he was under. He was also, according to the Arab store owner, very drunk at the time and acting belligerent. And, maybe I think a lot of people, there is like a lot of video that is not there. It's like, why did the police decide to pull him out of the cruiser and to restrain him on the sidewalk? Like, why did they do that? There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. It's the same with the Ahmaud Arbery case, that like the public and the mob have already reached a conclusion, and the judicial system is just there to rubber stamp it. And they tried to do this with Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown and many, many other cases that were racially influenced. Even though all these protesters say that we are under a white supremacist system, it's clearly not a white supremacist system when all these prosecutors and all the people in charge rush to appease them and will put innocent people on jail, such as George Zimmerman, in order to just like placate them.
Yeah,
it is an abuse of justice. And I hope justice is served here, whether it's exonerating him or it's sending him into jail for a lengthy time. If they exonerate him, I can only imagine the riots that will engulf our country.
Yeah.
But now for the final segment, we mentioned this at the beginning. We mentioned Trump a little bit. What has Trump's response been to the riots? Well, it's been pretty impotent. Trump ignored the riots Tuesday and Wednesday and didn't bother to tweet about them until Thursday. At that time, he sent out a pretty strong tweet that a lot of people were liking. I had just a few minutes before said that Trump won't say anything substantial. And then he tweeted, he called them thugs, and he said, he called for the National Guard to be out there, and he said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. And so my tweet looked really stupid, and I was like, okay, I gotta delete this. But then the next day, my tweet proved actually to be pretty justified. I just used the wrong word. He said he might say things substantial, but he's not doing anything substantial. On Friday, he walked back his comments and just kept talking about how we need to honor the memory of George Floyd. And then he was like saying, vote Democrats out of office. And the worst, most tone-deaf tweet came on Saturday morning, which I referenced earlier in the program. He implied the riots would end that night because of just how great the Secret Service was doing. And then he said the White House would be celebrating MAGA night. He heard that, apparently. That the White House, after a week of rioting, that something called MAGA night would be celebrated at the White House. Nobody has still figured out what MAGA night is, but it was a very Marie Antoinette moment of like, let them eat cake. Let them come to my MAGA night at my White House. This will calm down everybody. And he has called to designate Antifa a terror group, and he has been urging, and there's just news reports today that he was on a call with these governors and local officials, and he was urging them to crack down and use severe force against the protests and to clear the streets. And a lot of them are getting nervous about that, but he should have been saying this on Friday and Saturday. Do you think his MAGA night tweet will be how he is remembered for responding to the riots?
I think it will be from sane people like us, people who are honest with themselves and with their audience about what's happening with the riots, with Trump, all, everywhere. Because, the left, the Antifa burning down the cities will not remember that. They probably don't even know what that is. Like, they're probably too busy, forcing young black men to commit crimes. They probably haven't been keeping up with the president's Twitter feed. Black people won't remember it. The Twitter conservatives and the pundits and all of these people, they don't think it's a bad thing. They're like, yeah, MAGA night, like, Trump is doing the right thing. He's letting the Democrat mayors, they made their bed and Trump is forcing them to sleep in it. This is, those Democrats probably feel pretty stupid right now as their constituents tear down American history and kill white people. They probably feel pretty stupid for, as hordes of, as mobs fulfill their political ends, their political goals. Those Democrats probably feel pretty goofy. So for us, I think that we'll probably remember this as, I don't know if it would be a watershed moment, but something along those lines where we can look at the Trump presidency and say, like, this is just, it's at this point, at least, it's just completely neutered, completely out of touch with what's happening on the ground, with what's happening with the supporters in a lot of areas, and just, where we think, what the hell is going on? As far as everybody else, I don't know if anybody else will even remember that this stuff is good, that he tweeted that.
Yeah, and I think even liberal journalists are attacking him for his response. They're mocking him for hiding in a bunker on Friday night. And they're like, haha, like, and I saw like some liberal journalists who are like, why is Trump afraid of black people? Even though it's like people are throwing barricades and stuff. Like, I understand like him being moved to a bunker, but that being announced is just horrible optics. It's just like the country's burning and he's hiding in a bunker thinking about MAGA night. And the MAGA night tweet, you're probably right, but liberals are saying that he is weak in this, but at the same time, they're like saying he's stoking up the flames with his "when the looting starts, the shooting starts" tweet, which was just like standard, like Trump, like, a hard tweet, but no action. Like he talks tough, but there's no action behind it. And then he walked it back and he's like, "Oh, I was just warning about how, when looting gets out of control, like people shoot them, and that's terrible, and I don't want that to happen. Honor the memory of George Floyd." It's just been all over the place. There is like a problem with Trump that if he was like going full on, that he could make the riots worse by inflaming them. But at the same time, he's not urging these governors to take in the National Guard. It's like been a very weak and delayed response. He's not, it seems he's opposed to using federal troops. And a lot of the Trump shills on Twitter, their apologies for Trump's actions have been incredibly weak. Usually whenever Trump does something stupid that, America First people are criticizing him for, they'll offer like somewhat better responses. Like, with the Soleimani strike, they're like saying like, this is showing Trump's toughness. Like, this guy's a terrorist, blah, blah, blah. Whatever you think about that, that's like a fine argument if you want to believe that. Here, they're just saying like, whoa, the riots are a states' rights issue. Like, he can't do anything for it. I voted for Trump to do nothing. And it's like, oh, the journalists will call him a racist if he does anything. So it's better if he does nothing. Like, they have no real defenses. Like, nobody's defending his behavior. They're just saying that, well, he has to let them burn because he can't do anything. It's the first time I've ever seen people defend Trump being weak. Like his weakness is the argument itself. And we voted for Trump, or a lot of people voted for Trump to be more authoritarian. They wanted this great man who would restore law and order and would put America right. You would make America great again. And instead here, he's just like a weakling on Twitter who's just like tweeting away. And he seems totally incapable of doing anything while his country burns. And his strongest defenders wanting to say like, well, states' rights issue. I had a joke on Saturday after he tweeted out the MAGA night. I was like saying like Andrew Jackson famously during the nullification crisis said he couldn't do anything because this is a states' rights issue. But he did proudly announce that Old Hickory Night would be hosted at the White House that night. And that is like essentially what like Trump defenders are saying, like that this is all just a personality cult, that we're soothing his personality. Like we shouldn't care about the riots. We should care about like all these goober shills getting an invite to the White House to have a party with the president where they watch, Carpe Donktum memes and about him like owning Joe Biden, and they're just like attacking Joe Biden. Meanwhile, like the city is burning. His own supporters are ordinary conservative business owners are getting attacked, assaulted, their life savings destroyed. And we're instead supposed to just care that it's like a huge victory that he's like having, MAGA night with and watching like stupid memes of him like being John Wick and shooting liberals. And it's like, yeah, this is awesome. Like this is what we voted for Trump for, to have like a lame personality cult that leads to no benefits for ordinary Americans.
Yeah. And it's not even as if he didn't comment on anything. Benghazi was clearly a different situation, but his big critique of, Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration is you could have done something and you did nothing. You could have had somebody go in there and fix the problem. You could have sent people. There were people on standby. You could have fixed the situation. People didn't have to die. The embassy didn't have to get overrun, and you did nothing. You were negligent. And here he sits, under the White House, and nothing. He's doing nothing. He has the ability. He has the authority to do it. Whether or not it's popular with, and that's the thing. It's not even as if it would be popular with it's not even as if it would be unpopular with his base. What has been evidenced here with people defending his weakness is that Trump can do literally whatever he wants to, and his base generally will support it because they'll find any way that they can justify it.
So I think it's this hardcore sycophants. Like I was noticing a lot of people on Twitter who are agreeing with a lot of my criticisms of Trump, and usually a lot of my normie followers. I mean, this is not necessarily the most accurate sample size, but a lot of my normie followers were really distraught about this, and they were agreeing. They're like, "Why is Trump not doing anything? I'm not going to vote for him if he does nothing." Like, and there's like normal people. This are not like based racism groiper or something like that. This is not like Franco groiper or anything like that. It's like the ordinary people who are agreeing with me. And generally, the angry Trump supporters were so muted and just so like carrying out stretches of like of Trump's behavior that even they clearly know that Trump is not in the right here, but they want to defend him anyway. Right. And all these people are like saying like, oh, this will be a big issue. Like he'll be the law and order candidate. It's like, well, like, and they'll point out to like all the riots that were happening in 2016. It's like, well, in 2016, he wasn't the president. He was not the one in charge of making sure that these stopped. He was just the guy running for president who could just tweet about it and say, I will crush these riots if I'm president. But now he's showing he's not. And yes, Biden is MIA too, but Biden also has like a Trump strategy is just like, well, let Trump hang himself and I can just, do whatever I want. I mean, Biden doesn't have to say anything. He can just like hide out for the next few months and maybe still win the presidency. Right. And Trump's campaign realizes that this is a campaign issue. They are already tweeting and having ads about Biden's campaign staffers raising money for the rioters' bail. And that's smart. He should do that. And the issue is like Trump is not delivering a national address. He refuses to deliver it. It doesn't matter whether he inflames. He just needs to say, we will not tolerate chaos. We will not tolerate this criminal behavior. We will not tolerate rioting. We want peace and calm and law and order. He can just give the most like vague, national dress where he shows like he's in strength. He shows he's in charge, and he won't do it. He won't do it because his advisors are telling him that, oh, no, you're going to win a lot of these black voters. Like, don't alienate them. Don't alienate them. They're such an important component of the Trump coalition, even though the latest poll shows him at 3% among African Americans. 3%. Like, this is a joke. And he's done. And his like whole campaign is built around appealing to them, like from criminal justice reform, using these like goofy black personalities. Like, it's everything is about like, and always talking about the lowest black unemployment level ever. Like, his whole campaign is built around them, and he's getting 3%. And now he's going to let chaos take over our country because he wants to appeal to, he wants to, I don't know, get 9% of the black vote from 8%. Like, I don't, it's pathetic.
I don't know, man. Some polls would suggest he's getting upwards of 30%. So
yeah, the 30. Yeah, like I remember everyone who was like tweeting about like, oh, he's got 34%. Oh, it might be 40%. And there's like people like Dave Rubin who's like, I predict he'll win 30% of the black vote. And then they're like, oh, I think that's low. And like the boomers, like, I think that's a low figure. I think you went low. Like, I remember when Dave Rubin tweeted it at, there was like hundreds and hundreds of boomers who were mad that he didn't give a higher number. But they just live in this fantasy world. But he can't. A lot of his actions, like a lot of his stupid actions, they're like his base will not punish him. But here, I think they will, because they do see their own towns under fire. They see the president is hiding in his bunker. They see him as like delivering a totally weak response, and they didn't vote for Trump in 2016 to do that. And I don't know how I could see if they do polls about Republican support, I could see it dropping to possibly under 80%, which he's never been below, I think, 85 or 86% at any time in his presidency among Republican support. I mean, it's always been over 90%, but I could see it dropping significantly due to the riot response. I mean, maybe he will like act tough. I mean, but he has to deliver a national address. Like, this is the number one crisis in America. I mean, he can just speak to the people. I mean, it doesn't even need to be that hard. He just needs to address the nation.
Right.
But he won't do that. He won't do that. It's just like they're going to hope this blows over. And that's what the MAGA tweet was ultimately about. It was under this belief that this would all blow over, that nobody would care about this Saturday night, and he could go back to being a goofy boomer with, with all the dumb, like with the like 3-star accounts, like with the accounts in their name, and like Asian Pacific women for Trump, like tweeting about how he's the greatest. Like, actually in Friday night, I think it was on Friday night, they announced an Asian Pacific coalition for Trump at the height of the riots. I was like, they clearly know, they clearly have a pulse on what's going on. So we'll have to see what happens with Trump. I hope that, hopefully he does, do something about this, because otherwise, if he does nothing, nobody will. And, I don't necessarily want our country to be burned to the ground and ruled by Antifa.
Right. Yeah, I hope that something happens. I mean, obviously, this type of thing will continue to happen and escalate, especially, supposing that Trump wins the next election afterwards. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns, and this type of stuff is only going to escalate as the demographics change, as the mass media brainwashing and manipulation continues, and all of that. So obviously this stuff has to happen, or will happen, or it's inevitable in certain regards, but hopefully we can do something to prevent it, or at least Trump, while he's in office, will do something to, kind of stymie it a little bit, but we'll see.
Oh, when the looting starts, the tweeting starts, or the posting starts. So we know that for sure, but that's all we have the time for today. It's been an excellent discussion with our newfangled guest, Jake Lloyd. Jake, how can people find you and support you?
Well, you can find me. You can find all of my epic takes on Twitter at Jacob C. Lloyd. You can follow me there. Telegram is t.me/Jake Lloyd. And I also have a YouTube channel. If you search for my name on YouTube, you'll find it. Same with DLive. So I stream on DLive, and I'll be back streaming on YouTube here pretty soon. I do a show We're working out the details exactly right now, but generally it's 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I do a live show for about an hour. So you can find me any of those places. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, Jake. We'll have to have you back on again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. And until next time, stay respected.